It gives me great pleasure to welcome for this interview Michael Shaw, alias Urban Monk, which is your Twitter alias, which is
Yeah.
where I principally know you from, and hoping to get to know you a lot better. So first of all, could you just tell us a little bit about your self outside Twitter, who you are and what you do, and so on?
Yeah. Well, basically, I'm a pastor in a church called Devonport Community Baptist Church down in Plymouth. I've
Mhm.
been here for 9 years. We're a very small Baptist church in a very deprived neighbourhood of Plymouth, one of the most deprived in the southwest of England, and one of the most deprived in the whole country. So yeah, we're a really small little church of very committed, but yeah, it's an interesting place to be a minister of. Yeah, so that's what I do.
Mm.
That's where I exist.
And
And
I
yeah,
know that
yeah.
your spirituality includes elements that are very ancient. I
Mm,
guess you could describe it as kind of Celtic spirituality, although with it's directed very sort of sharply at the challenges of modern life, and I guess that arises out of your environment in the place where you're a minister. Tell us
yeah,
a
I
bit
mean,
about that ministry.
yeah, I mean the Celts were a very missionary organization working in quite a dark environment, especially among the sort of like the Irish Celts going in, Irish Celtic movements from Ireland into Iona, into the Pictland, and then of course
So we're
Aidan
talking
traveling
Dark
down to
Ages,
Lindisfarne and
basically.
the Saxons. So really sort of working amongst the people who are sort of in the darkest
Mm,
elements of that part of the British history. So that's why I'm interested in it. And so I'm interested on a missionary level. They were an incredibly missionary people, but also
mm,
incredibly um, in touch people. So we're an eco church, and for us, being one with our environment is really important. Especially when you've got the sea on one, with Plymouth, you've got
mm,
sea on one side and you've got Dartmoor on the other. So you're squashed,
mm.
this urban city in between, one of the wilds
Yeah,
of Dartmoor and then the wilds of like the ocean towards, to out and towards the sea. So
yeah.
you've got those two wilds, and
Many
so
people will think of the kind of Celtic spirituality, and they'll think, ah, nature, it's all pretty, and so I guess that's the kind of Dartmoor and the beauties of Devon that you're referring to. But
yeah,
then, as you say, they're incredibly kind of missionary and vital and
yeah,
challenging characters. Some of these ancient
yeah,
Celtic dudes, and
yeah,
um, that seems to
yeah.
be, looking at your Twitter materials and the stuff on your website,
Mm.
that is really where you're at.
Yeah, we try to find ways of bringing beauty into our environment. So one of the things we do is we've got a community allotment in the back of a
All
house that
right.
we run. We've got we yarn bomb the local high street, so we cover it in wool and we do it, kind of decorate it, and then we dig up all the kind of weeds that have grown and sow better seeds and things like
Okay.
that. And this is a really high street wise. It's a really difficult environment. It's full of casino, shop machines on one side. You've got charity
Yeah.
shops, you've got bric-a-brac shops, and then in the middle of these planters, and no one looks after them. The councils don't bother anymore, so we do. So yeah, we do. We just look after these little planters, and so yeah, we trying to bring in some beauty into
Yeah. It's
some
perhaps the
parts of the city
last
which are quite
place that
grey.
you would expect a sort of an outbreaking of God's creative beauty and energy, but
Yeah,
that's kind of what you're doing. What
yeah, we
what
do,
what?
and we do that in the same services that we do. So um, uh, what one service we did, not just before Christmas, I got chalk paint and I got permission. We don't own a building, so we rent a local community
Mm,
centre, and I've got a big outspace, and I got chalk paint and I sprayed a chalk paint labyrinth outside, and for our
mm,
worship we basically walked the labyrinth, and
mm.
so yeah, just
Fantastic.
trying to do little different ways of engaging with people's
Yeah.
spirituality that goes beyond just, I mean, yes, singing's great and it's really important, especially at the moment. We were out, we our services are mostly outside at the moment, just to sing, but also to
Yeah.
sort of reflect and think and challenge ourselves spiritually.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it just engages people in different ways, and people
And
reflect in different ways, and different people have different learning styles. I think also people have different
mm,
worship styles. Unfortunately, what we tend to do as church, we say like everyone needs to fit this box,
yeah.
and yeah, so sometimes just mixing up a bit could be
What
quite
kind
interesting.
of praise comes naturally to you? What's your when do you feel most in touch with God when you're praising?
um on a hill, on a beach,
Fantastic.
yeah, I mean walking on a hillside, or on a beach. Or I took a retreat day the other day, and I just sat on a beach for a bit, you know
Mm,
um
yeah.
just seeing God in everything. So for
Yeah.
me, I'm a very sort of outdoors person, but actually I'm
Right.
in this very urban inner city environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, there are easy ways to escape. I can literally get on a ferry and I'm in Cornwall. So and that's got this rugged sort of cliff top like landscapes and stuff. So
Was there a
and the beach.
particular sort of time or experience that made you sort of move in the direction of kind of a spirituality that has being in nature as a big part of it, or was that something that's always been kind of natural to you?
It's I think I think I've come to the realization through various things that I might have ADD, so
Mm,
a neurological different way of
sure.
seeing. And I remember looking at my school reports. So my school reports was he just spends his day looking outside.
You and me both.
uh,
I was
and I
accused
don't
of
I
being a
don't
window
really like
starer too.
being I don't like being inside. I like being outside. I like
Yeah.
I've got a dog, and with dog walks, I'll go for like long dog
Oh,
walks,
cool.
and if I'm stuck inside all day, I get a headache. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I like being out, and
Yeah.
yeah. I think and I remember I think I realised how in touch I was. Like this is one of those sort of like I was in South Africa, and I
Yeah.
with some friends went for a friend's wedding, and I climbed we climbed to the top of Table Mountain,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
and at the well, actually I think we got the cable car on that occasion, but anyway.
Yeah.
And I got to the top of Table Mountain, and one of my friends looked at me and said, "Michael, you're crying." And I was like, "Yeah, I was. I felt very spiritually awake
Yeah.
at that point."
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a moment where I was kind of like, "Hang on a minute, this is really interesting."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've always found being outside
Well,
just
I think it's such a beautiful thing that you bring that into kind of urban community as well. You try to
yeah.
bring literally some of the nature, but also, um, it seems to me, I don't know whether this is right, but your desire to build community and to bring together the threads that bind
Mm,
people. That's restoring a kind of
mm,
natural harmony in a way. That's
mm.
how it feels to me.
Yeah, yeah. I think particularly in urban environments, it's quite interesting. You kind of meet some people, and here we are in Plymouth, so you've literally got the sea just there,
Mm.
and you can talk to people, and they've never been to a beach,
Yeah.
and kind of think, how does that happen? How can you? I mean, obviously we don't have any beaches really in Plymouth, so you
Mm.
have to go to Cornwall, you have to go out to the Southampton, Devon. So
Yeah.
you do have to travel to get to a beach, but you have some people who live in this very sea environment
Mm.
who've never been to a beach.
Yeah.
And I suppose really that sort of challenges you to think about that level of deprivation
Sure.
that 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 they've just never experienced the thing.
It's a
And
poverty of expectations.
yeah, there's a tremendous level of poverty in these areas
Mm.
where, and so yeah, so sometimes it is bringing a little bit of beauty
Mm.
into this urban grey environment,
Yeah.
that it can be. And yeah, we in Devonport, we're blessed. We do have a little sort of park by the sea, and we have a kind of really wonderful
Mm.
park in Devonport. So there is these beautiful places,
Yeah.
but it's interesting, where I live. I remember I had a conversation with a local, and they were saying, oh, there's no plays, space for kids to play around here. And
Mm.
someone else said, well, what about the play park in Devonport Park, which is, literally I walked it 10 minutes,
Yeah.
10 minutes to walk it in 10 minutes. And she
Yeah.
goes, oh, that's way too far. I'm not going to walk that far. And there are some very sort of limitations of people. And so,
Yeah.
It's an interesting environment to be in, such an urban place, and yet have such wonderful beauty on either side of you, and people don't always experience it.
It's a very powerful thing, I think, to see the urban environment and the social environment in our cities as a kind of a desert. It's a desert of people are they lack resources, but they also kind of lack a horizon. They lack expectations, and what you're doing, it seems to me, is making things bloom in the desert.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it is a desert place, and that, I mean, the Celts were inspired by the desert fathers and mothers, and they sought out places that were dry, and actually, a place like Devonport is spiritually dry. So we've got there's 5 or 6,000 people who live in Devonport, and we've got 2 churches in the area. One is a very small Anglican church for about 10 people, and one is our little Baptist church of about 25, 30 people. And if you took this part of Devonport and you placed it in Africa or India, you describe it as an unreached people group.
Yeah.
Because actually there's so little connection to church here.
Absolutely.
And so for me, what I'm doing is actually in the margins, and also missionary stuff, because actually so few people have any connection with church.
So a character like Columba and Aidan and Patrick, these great characters from the dark ages of 1,500 years ago, that they have extreme relevance. And there is a certain, I mean, you use the phrase kind of darkness to describe our current times. I mean, I suppose you've just described darkness in the sense of lack of awareness of the church, lack of connection to the church.
Yeah, I think the lack of connections. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, there's a lot of light here as well. There's a lot of beauty, and there's also a lot of generosity. There's a story. There was a fire in some blocks of flats near me, and the whole flats got completely wiped out, and all the residents were made homeless, and they didn't take up the insurance the housing association had offered them. Many of them, they literally had the clothes they were wearing, that was all they had. And I drove one off to a hotel, a family off to the hotel, and literally they said, all we've got now is these clothes. But what was amazing was, within hours, hundreds of clothes parcels, bedding, toys arrived and were taken to the local guild hall, and it filled the guild hall. And they had to create a charity shop to sell this stuff in order to, and this was just ordinary people, and like neighbors coming out the house with just bags of clothes and taking them down.
A pop-up charity happened.
And actually tremendous generosity amongst the people. So these people they never have met before, and yet I grew up in Surrey. And I imagine if that happened in Surrey, they'd have had insurance, and no one would have, everyone would have been fine. And actually no one would have done anything like that. But there was literally a town, that our guild hall was full of clothes and toys and bedding. And so there is darkness, but there is tremendous generosity. And I think for me, there's also a tremendous element of the kingdom of God that bursts out at those moments that people don't see when they look at the surface of Devonport.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'd like to move on a little bit to talk about, I don't know whether it's presumptuous to say your own experience of dwelling in the desert. I know that you have experienced fertility struggles, and I was wondering if you would be okay telling us about that journey.
So my wife and I got married in 2006. We waited a year before we started trying, and then a year went up and nothing had happened, and so we went to the doctors, and unfortunately we both got diagnosed with problems. I have a low sperm count. My wife had some other issues, and then more issues have developed since, and we got told it's very unlikely you're going to have children naturally. but we didn't give up hope. We tried. We continued to try. We tried for about 7 years, and in that time, we tried everything. We tried everything. So I gave up booze. My wife and I gave up sugar, caffeine. We took all manner of vitamins. We went down the Chinese medicine route. We had acupuncture. I used to drink these terrible Chinese herbs, which were supposed to do something. I don't know whether they did or not. I don't know. We tried prayer. We had people pray over us. We had, we had everything, threw everything at it, and eventually wife got to just before around 35, and we went down the IVF route eventually after about 7 years of that. And unfortunately, during that, the first one was stopped halfway through. Discovered something with my wife that needed an operation, so then that was put back on hold. And then eventually we tried again, and we made the decision we'd only try it once, not for financial reasons, just for closure reasons.
That's a biggie.
We knew people who've gone on and on and on, tried, and they thrown everything at it. And so we tried that, and I remember the worst day. I think the worst day of my life was the day my wife's period came on that IVF, and we knew that was the end of that part of the journey. And our story has moved on. We very quickly went down the adoption route. And we adopted a little girl 5 years ago, and she's fantastic. So
that's
there is a good end to our story, in the sense that we have adopted, but it is not how we would have expected it to end. We thought we would just like everyone else I know, sort of pop out a couple of children, and it would all be easy. And then it wasn't, and I think that left us with a lot of questions. I was training for ministry through this, so and so that sort of led to lots of questions about, as a minister, should I get priority in this list of prayer? And then having us struggle with simple trying to do ministry things while at the same time sort of struggling with our own internal battles of what's going on and why God wasn't answering our prayers. So there's lots of stuff on that.
So that's a unique situation, training for ministry while dealing with this. I mean, I know that many people, myself included, are tempted to feel what you could describe as anger towards God, and assailed by doubts is probably a fair way of describing how I've been at various times. Is that something that you've had to deal with? And if so, how did you come through that?
I suppose it's kind of like, really, I grew up in a charismatic evangelical Baptist church. Everyone turned out, we all worshipped. It was, everything was always upbeat, joyful, happy. I suppose really training for ministry sort of engaged parts of the Bible that I'd not engaged with before. The lament in Psalms, the unanswered prayers of Jesus. He's got unanswered prayers, the unanswered prayers of Paul. And I suppose it gave me a much stronger, robust understanding of God.
That's interesting.
That God isn't a sort of celestial magician that grants our wishes, but that God, and actually you can be angry, upset, and shout at God, and you've not fallen into some backsliding thing that I would have been told when I was like 21. Oh, you're backsliding, questioning. And I suppose really it's given me a much more robust theology of God, understanding of who God is, and also in some ways also kind of gripped closer to him. I can't speak for my wife. Her story is different from mine. I suppose really for me it left me kind of like with this, at some points of if there is no God, then what is there? And
No, I can completely relate to that sense of moments of desolation, and people use big terms like, dark night of the soul, but, that
Yeah,
is what it is. That is
yeah,
what that
yeah,
term means,
yeah.
to
You know,
feel the
literally.
absence of God more than the presence.
Yeah, and I think we don't really have a good understanding of God's silence.
Mm,
Um, and actually, God's silence is much more common than God's voice.
truly. Mm.
And I think part of the problem is we think God should be speaking to us all the time, but then I think also part of that is we're not very good at listening to God.
Yeah.
Um, and I look back on our story, I mean, our daughter, you know,
Mm.
we, I don't think we'd ever. We've talked about it. I don't think we'd ever want 9 years of it, and we still count ourselves as infertile because we
Sure.
are
Yeah.
infertile. But the process of trying 8-9 years of that,
Mm.
you know, but at the end of that, we've got our daughter. She
Yes.
is amazing.
Yeah.
The timing for our adoption process didn't work as we'd like, but if the timing had worked out as we'd like, we'd never have met her.
Yes.
And if we've never been through this infertility thing, we would never have met her.
Yes.
Because although we always, we're one of those. Oh yeah, we'll have a couple of our own and then we'll adopt. That's what we thought we'd do, and we wouldn't have met her.
A perfect example of how, when the rain falls on the desert, it produces these completely unexpected
Yeah.
blooms. You were talking earlier about the way spontaneous expressions of love and generosity broke out in difficult circumstances in your community, and I don't know. Would you describe the experience of being able to adopt a beautiful daughter as that kind of spontaneous and gratuitous breaking out of God's love?
I think the provision of her for us has been, the timing was perfect for us. Her as a who fits into our family is perfect. I think our only wish is that my wife could have carried her. But actually, even someone said to us, blood is thicker than water. Actually, it isn't.
Sure.
She is our daughter, and she doesn't have a single genetic,
Sure.
as far as we know, any genetic connection to us. And yet she is completely our daughter. And I think for me that's something that I think goes beyond what our world expectations of things are, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolutely sort of fantastic experience to get an insight into your spirituality and your journey through childlessness, but also your journey into forms of flourishing in Britain's cities. And so I'd like to say thank you very much.
No problems. Thank you.
Sharing that with us. And one more question. What have you got coming up on the allotment at the moment?
And we've got some potatoes, and we've got some. It's great because we've got one bed. We've got a seed bed, so we're in progress. It's
okay.
Kind of working on it, and we've got some with some onions, some lettuce, some potatoes, some peas, and I think what we'll probably end up doing them is give them away to people who need food. So we don't, and none of us need the food. So we'll try and find people who need food and give them some fresh potatoes.
This is absolutely literally a sort of flowering in the desert.
Yeah.
I've got peas on my little vegetable patch that are about this high at the moment.
Yeah, they're about that. They're starting to flower, our ones, which is great. I think Devon and Cornwall tend to get things a little bit earlier than the rest of the country.
It's a little warmer because of the Gulf Stream. And
so we do get a bonus of everything pops up a little bit earlier. So our peas are a little bit more advanced. But we'll find ways of giving them away to people. People who need food, people who need, and there's lots of people who need fresh food around here because food poverty is huge in this area.
That is an absolutely brilliant idea and one to be emulated. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Take care.
Thank you.